We're here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Digital Foundry live stream. I'm John Lindemann, of course, and I'm here with a very special guest today to talk some Jag. I'm here joined by the one and only Rich Whitehouse. Welcome, Rich. If you can speak, we're here. Hello, everyone, and can you hear me? Oh, we lost him. Rich? Technical difficulties. Oh, that's right. He said his internet was spotty, so I'm going to have to cover for him for the meeting. It's already a mess. So, while he reconnects, hopefully, this is the best way to begin. We're actually going to kick off some Atari carts. So, how was that? Like, on a scale of 1 to, I don't know, like, was that the worst start to a stream ever? Should I keep going like this, or should I, like, restart the stream? What do you think? Or I can just start playing some Atari cards. You guys can vote. Just let me know whether I should do that or not. He warned me that his internet might go down, so I only have myself to blame for this. Let's see what happens. Well, anyway, so here we go. I'm going to carry on. Hopefully don't lose too many people while we wait for him to return. So I'm gonna start here by playing some Atari carts because I don't know if you guys know, but Atari carts is pretty much one of the smoothest games in the Jag. You see it running here at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second. This is just a shameless ripoff of Mario Kart, also a ripoff of Scoonie Kart on the PC, if you know that. But this has a special feature to it. And well, did I just lose because I was sitting there too long? Possibly. Am I stuck? See, this is typical Jag right here. Let me out. There we go. So this actually has an amazing feature. It has terrain that actually moves up and down. Check it out. Like, it's not just mode 7 flat. Like, you actually have these little subtle hills that you go up and down. So, everyone here, I hope you're enjoying this this solo stream where everything has gone wrong. Everything is broken.
Hey,
wait, I think I hear him. I think he's
I'm
back.
sorry. That's, you know how I was saying my internet's been spotty.
Yep. Go ahead and hit that camera button if you could, so we can share everybody. Oh, here it comes. Yeah. It's back. It worked. The stream is not dead. We are alive.
Seconds after you went live, my internet died. So.
So this is, I feel like that, though, is the perfect way to begin a stream about the Atari Jaguar. You know, like, what more could you ask for? Something going epically wrong right from launch.
Exactly.
But let me reintroduce you. Rich, why don't you, actually, you've done a lot of stuff over the years. And one of the most recent things you've done, and something we're going to see some special stuff on tonight, is work on the BigPEmu, or how would you actually say that?
I usually say BigPEmu, but I always tell people, you know, however you want to say it, there is no correct pronunciation.
So, BigPEmu, so this was basically what was used in Atari 50, right?
Yeah.
So this is how they got the Jaguar emulation there. It has also been released out on the PC, and it's the first emulator to run every commercial game. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct.
And that's kind of an achievement. But of course, you've also done other stuff besides just work on Jaguar emulators, right? Like Jedi 2, for instance, and a lot of other stuff in the past.
I think my career is about 25 years long now, so it's a lot of stuff in there.
And then somehow it all came back to the Jaguar.
Indeed.
But you got to turn the Jaguar into a commercially viable product, and that is something that even Atari couldn't pull off. So my hat is off to you for that. But let's talk some Jag, all right? So now that you've actually gone back and essentially had to reverse engineer the entire system, and figure out all the internals. I just want to start with what are your basic feelings on the Jaguar hardware now that you've broken it down?
Yeah. So, even before I started on this project, I thought the hardware was pretty interesting because for the time, it's a pretty advanced architecture. You've got these two pretty pretty fast RISC processors that are completely brand new designs, custom silicon, which was reasonably unheard of for the time for a video game manufacturer to be like, yeah, we're gonna design our own brand new chips, and just integrate that into all this brand new ICs and stuff like that were common, obviously, but just the two brand new bits of silicon in there was an interesting choice, and I think that's a big part of why nobody had emulated it successfully, is that those chips were not that well documented. The pipelining wasn't documented. The documentation that did exist was wrong in a lot of places. Like, it just was outright said the wrong thing in terms of like, oh, this instruction does this. It's like, no, it certainly does not.
Yeah.
But, even before I started on this thing, I found the architecture really interesting, and it fascinated me because and when you look at it, it seems like something you should be able to get a lot of power out of. It feels like, something that should definitely be able to compete with like a PlayStation, because you've got, 225 megahertz RISC chips, which it's a lot of power, and you've got, the 68K in there as well, which is half the clock speed of the RISC chips. And I didn't really understand why developers had such a hard time developing for the thing and getting performance out of it and all that. And so it had always been on my kind of bucket list to make an emulator for it.
Right.
And that's why when Atari had the need for the Atari 50 anniversary collection, I jumped at it, and I was kind of like, well, initially I asked the Digital Eclipse guys, hey, can I have like a month to kind of feel things out, prototype things, and make sure this is going to be viable in a commercial timeline, because this is all brand new R&D stuff, and there's got to be, some reason people have been struggling with writing emulators for this thing for the past 20 years.
Yeah, you're right. Like, there were emulators, but none of them had been done very well, or like they didn't support many games, right. And it was kind of this black hole for a long time.
Yeah, and a lot of that, I think, comes down to the fact that it is a really hard system to emulate accurately, and in a way that's not super expensive while you're emulating it accurately. And it turned out that, this was actually my very first emulator that I wrote from scratch. It turned out I had a propensity for it, luckily.
That's good.
And so within like a month of working on the thing, I had Tempest 2000 up and running perfectly and everything. And that was basically like our minimum viable product for Atari 50. It's like, as long as we can get Tempest 2000 running, we'll at least ship this as part of the product.
Cool.
So I'm like, all right, yeah, we're definitely going to do this. And I'm going to take it, as far as I can, and see what else we can get included in there by the time Atari 50 ships.
So Tempest, though, is an interesting one because that game runs at such a variable frame rate. Like, it seems to target 60 frames per second, but rarely really gets there. And so, I feel like emulating that... I recall Atari 50 running it a little bit faster or, like, smoother than the real thing. Is that right? Because what would it take to get like psycho-accurate timing? Well, I kind of answered it right there, but getting that exactly right.
Yeah, so there was a bug actually when Atari 50 initially launched where people were using a kind of a red herring comparison for the timing, because the game over screen, when you went to that, it would go really fast, and people are like, oh, look at this, look how far off this is from the actual hardware. Timing's all wrong on the simulator. And actually, no, it just turned out that there was a special case where the blitter was having some overlapping commands, and it was stopping the timing on the last command that had happened, and so it basically considered that otherwise really expensive game over copy to be free. And so, that wasn't so much like, oh, the timing of the whole emulator is off. That was just like a little one-off fix, and we fixed it in the patch.
That's good. That's good. That's cool. Oh, but, real quick though, I do want to take we have a super chat from Nash here, who's a good friend of the show, and he just says, "Greetings, John and Rich. Any memories of playing networked Doom on the Jag?" Do you have memories?
Tried it.
I have actually,
unfortunately.
believe it or not, back in 2007 or 8 maybe, with a friend of mine, we actually linked up a couple Jags with Doom, and it barely worked. It kept dropping connection like constantly. And sure enough, they actually have this in the manual. If you look at the manual, it specifically says, I don't remember the exact wording, but it's something along the lines of like, this is an evil game with demons, so like the demons can crawl around inside the wire and sometimes cause it to disconnect and stuff like that. Like, so they actually tried to explain away the bug in the manual. And I think it's because the network adapter thing had not shipped when Doom did, right? So they put in support, but never truly, I guess, got to test it with the finished version. And as a result, it's pretty buggy.
Anecdotally, it can be used pretty reliably, but I think there may be some issues in the Doom implementation. And that's actually on my to-do list still for the emulator, is to properly emulate that stuff. And, you know, Battlestar and Doom, I think, are the main games that will get to benefit from that. But my hope is that because the protocol was already, you know, so lossy and crappy, that it will actually funnel over the internet quite nicely. And I won't have to do a lot of compensation for it, but we'll see. We'll see how that works out.
That's kind of funny. You're right. Modern internet might actually be a faster solution than the original link. So I'm actually going to move over to another game here for the people out before we continue. And first I want to say I'm powering it off. So I have my actual Jaguar here, and I'm using a flash cart with it for tonight just to keep things moving. But I do actually have a large selection of boxed games, including an autographed Doom even, which is cool. I love my Jag collection, but this cart from Retro HQ, the game drive, super useful. This is awesome.
Who'd you get on to Doom? Is it Romero?
Yeah.
Cool.
So it's, you know, it's fun to have. What can I say? I like having these box Jag games. It's pretty fun. Actually, I do see another question here that might be interesting from Onikaze, who asks, any chance of Jaguar VR emulation?
Yep, that is on the to-do list. And if you haven't checked it out, do check out my Sega VR project. You can go to either richwhitehouse.com or gamehistory.org, and it's probably quite a ways back in the article history at this point. But it's a whole article on basically we found. Yeah, I'll go over it real quick. I know it's not Jag related, but basically we found a prototype software that was actually made for the Sega VR, and it still happened to have the headset interface code in it. And I've since come across a couple of different games that were targeted at the Sega VR and reverse engineered them, and found that sadly, even though they were intended to be Sega VR games, they never got to the point of working with the actual Sega VR hardware, because there were so few of those prototype units in circulation, and most developers never even got their hands on them. But fortunately, the people that did Nuclear Rush actually did get their hands on one and did integrate the headset driver. So I was able to reverse engineer that from the software and figure out how it was expecting the headset to work. And from that, I was able to then, like, you know, the article goes into the whole process of, oh, here's what I had to do to actually get this thing building from source again, and fixing all these different bugs, and then going and fixing these bugs that still existed in the game itself that were preventing things from working smoothly. But then the interesting part is, of course, when I actually integrate support for Sega VR into an existing Sega Genesis emulator. I've been kind of I haven't really released it before. It's basically a branch of DGen that I've been using for my own reverse engineering and analysis type stuff. But anyway, I ended up adding support in that emulator for it, and you can actually put, you know, a modern Vive headset on or whatever and experience Sega VR through that. And so the goal, of course, is to do something similar with my emulator now for Jag VR. And the main thing that's up in the air is we don't actually really know the hardware specs, and nobody's been able to confirm or deny a lot of it. And like, I know there are a couple people that have them in circulation, but nobody's ever actually popped it open and like taken pictures of all the circuit boards and documented.
I've used one
all the
too,
chips.
actually. I have used one once, but unfortunately, obviously, they weren't going to let me open the darn thing.
Yeah, and so like what I'm curious to know about is like display specifications and capabilities because the one game that I know of that's actually made for the thing, and I've heard there are other prototypes that people have played for it, but I don't know of any dumps for any of those. But the
Ah,
main one is Missile Command VR, and
yep, yep.
although they implemented the tracker for that, there is absolutely no stereoscopic rendering. And so that's led a lot of people to assume, oh, the headset just didn't do stereo, like it didn't have stereo support. And
Right.
people are like, oh, well, that would have been, so hard to do for the time anyway. And I'm like, well, not really. Sega VR did it. So,
Yeah, exactly. It could have been done. I mean, the main
yeah,
the main limitation with VR from the '90s was that the frame rate is typically very, very low, and that was
yeah,
also true in the expensive arcade stuff like Dactyl Nightmare and everything. It was very choppy,
yeah,
but still, it was cool.
yeah.
And
And
man,
so,
I
like,
really hope we can get this preserved someday.
yeah, me too. It's definitely fairly high on my list. And, I'm not doing that well health-wise right now, but if I do, start feeling better enough, I probably will be approaching some of these people that still own units to be like, hey, can I just come stay with you for a week and reverse engineer this thing,
Oh my god, that would be amazing. Actually, it's like Jaguar VR reverse engineering party.
Indeed.
I'll bring the drinks. You bring the knowledge. No, that is really interesting, and you're right. Like I'd heard Missile Command never had, and it did not have stereoscopic 3D implemented, but
Right.
that would have been that was the main thing missing, and like you say, it should have been feasible given that you could do it on the Genesis as well, right?
Yep. So
Although
yeah, it's really a question of like, did they have it in the hardware and they just never got around to implementing it for that title, or were they really trying to pull off a monoscopic VR headset?
yeah, that man, that was such an interesting era though, where so many of these companies were trying their hand at VR products, right? Like it was Atari, Sega, and then of course the Virtual Boy, which didn't have head tracking, but it was still attempting stereoscopic 3D. Uh, and then it was clearly not ready, I would say, but it's interesting that so many were trying it.
Yeah,
But man,
yeah. Like,
real quick, another super chat from Nash who just wants to say, "P.S. Just want to quickly thank Rich for Oasis."
oh yeah, I'd say my pleasure. I don't. That project over the years has been like, had its ups and downs. Because I'll tell people who aren't familiar, Oasis is basically like this toolkit for reverse engineering and interpreting any kind of data under the sun. And of course, it's mainly for video games. But I've gone into all kinds of different domains with it. I use it for medical imaging a lot,
Oh wow!
um, even for like audio analysis type stuff, different types of data transforms. Everything, including the kitchen sink, basically. And so it's out there as a program, and you load it up, and it kind of just looks like it's a 3D model viewer. Like you don't get a feeling that, oh, this thing has all these powerful different features from a user perspective. It's just like, oh yeah, I can open these files and export them to different formats. And over the years, people have, of course, primarily wanted to just use it to like rip game models and put them over in
Right, right.
Gmod or whatever. And I get requests from those people constantly being like, hey, can you add support for such and such a game? And oh, I can't figure out how to use a batch exporter. Can you help me? And it's like, well, there's a user manual for that, and there's a whole scripting system so that people who aren't me can add, format support to the thing. And there's just like a kind of I don't know. I've experienced a lot of rudeness from those users over the years.
Oh, that's
Just
a
like
shame.
yeah, there's a strange sense of entitlement that seems to come out of that community. It's like, oh well, if you don't do this, I'm not going to be able to make the project that I want, and therefore you're really shitty for not doing exactly what I tell you and denying
Okay, yeah,
everybody the joy of my vision. You know?
that sucks. Yeah. See, I love tools like that though because I also use those in video production sometimes because it's useful to like rip out models and stuff like that
Yeah,
and data from games both to look at it and figure certain things out, but also you can integrate that into the video, right? And
yeah,
I've done that stuff before and it's quite fun and useful.
Yeah,
So there's
the stuff that I love to see people using it for are actually developing for it, using it to reverse engineer stuff and figure out new formats, and then actually using it to dig through data for historical purposes or to, find stuff that might have been missed or to actually create a more complete history of the development of the video game and the technology that was used in it and how that stuff was made. Like, that's the stuff I really love to see.
that is yeah. See, that is awesome. That's that's a real gift to the community, I think, and it's a shame that some people take that somewhat entitled view of things.
Yeah,
But
that's the
that's
problem with software like that. It just appeals to so many different demographics and has so many different purposes that, of course, you get the bad apples in there too.
yeah. But I'd imagine there's plenty of people that silently appreciate and love it, like Nash here, of course. So
Yeah,
that's
thank you, Nash.
that's really cool. So while we're sitting here playing Alien versus Predator, have you spent much time looking at this game and maybe gaining understanding of what it's doing, how it works, and maybe why it runs as slow as it does?
Yeah, so an interesting thing about this game
Oh, I can't find
is
it.
that it is artificially frame capped, and I believe the math works out to 16 frames per second under PAL and 15 frames per second under NTSC. And
Interesting.
one of the interesting things I actually can demo here tonight. I've been working on this brand new scripting system for the emulator, and I haven't really, unveiled too much about it yet. I posted on my Twitter the other night a screenshot of Cybermorph running at full native
Yeah, I
resolution.
saw that. It looked amazing.
Yeah. So this scripting system is actually really powerful, and it's going to let people do a whole bunch of things with a whole bunch of different games. And one of the scripts I'm going to demonstrate is basically unlocking the frame rate in Alien versus Predator. So
Oh,
yeah, it's got a nice little setting on there where you can, adjust what the new frame cap will be. And I haven't gone to all the extreme effort of like decoupling like movement logic from AI logic and stuff like
sure.
that. So when you uncap that frame rate, if you go into full 60 hertz, it's just going to be like aliens are like running around like they're on crack. But so what I like to do usually is I like to keep it in the 20 to 30 hertz area because
It
to me
just yeah.
that still feels like pretty close to the game, but it also feels so much nicer and smoother.
Oh man. And are we going to be able to show off that a little bit this evening,
Yeah,
you think?
yeah, definitely. Whenever you want, I can.
Actually, maybe let's jump over there for a minute, everyone. So the
Okay.
quality on this is not going to be amazing because we're doing it through Discord. But if you'll permit me, go ahead and fire up your screen share there, and
All right.
let's give this a try and see if it works. Okay. So
All
if I
right.
hit watch stream, switch over to this. So yeah, it's a little low res because we are just doing Discord screen cap, but let's see how it looks. We
All
can at
right.
least see if it runs smoother. That's the big thing.
Yeah. So I'll go over like real quick what I've added here. So I've got this script modules feature, and these are modules that I've written so far. The ones with the asterisks are the active ones. Red
Awesome.
Hole Hockey, I'll mention real quick, is something that a lot of people complain. It's prototype hardware and it's got real messed up timing. So by default in the emulator, you see a lot of flickering as the field is rendering. This
Right,
is a
right.
simple script that fixes that, and I figured this will be a nice example for anybody else that runs into timing issues and wants to, basically develop a simple script to fix them. And now we've got
Ah,
Alien versus Predator here, and
okay.
you get your different settings that are registered by each of these scripts. And so AVP
Dude.
in particular, VBlank count means basically how many VBlanks do we need to wait in between frames when we're doing that artificial frame capping. And
Right.
the calculation, I believe, is for NTSC, it's going to be 60 divided by VB count minus 1 is the actual frame rate. So this is going to be 30 hertz, if I'm doing that
Okay.
math correctly.
Yep. That should be right.
It's
Alien versus
loaded
Predator.
on
There
it.
we go. Let's see how this goes. We're also gonna have to
And
settle tonight the 64-bit debate once and
indeed.
for all. All right. Let's see here.
You'll notice that I instinctively just like fast forward through all these loads. So
Right. Of course. All right, so we're jumping in the game here.
All right, hold on.
That
To actually
that
take
might be,
advantage of this as well,
yeah.
I need to basically make it so the Jaguar
Oh,
is running,
ah,
pretty much uncapped.
unlocked. Right.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to be a little bit sporadic. It's going to be, probably somewhere in the 15 to 20-ish frames per second area.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, I can already see a gigantic difference there, just in terms of
Yeah.
how fast that moves. All right.
All right.
Whoa, whoa!
Yeah.
Even through Discord video, this is like mind blowing. Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Everything moves quick.
Yeah,
So do you think
exactly.
that's actually something that could be fixed with additional
Yeah,
work?
definitely. Like
Ah, cool.
it's a much more involved fix. Like you
Yeah,
have to
of
get
course.
deeper into the game logic, but it definitely is possible. And I understand that AVP source code is actually floating around out there somewhere. I
Oh,
I haven't gotten a hold of it or tried to build it myself, so I don't know if it is out there, if it really reflects the final binary or not here. But if that's the case, that could also be very helpful, even as just a reference to figure out, oh well, this is how we can, decouple these various systems and the timing of the player
dude.
movement from the actual frame rate.
Yeah, dude,
Because
that could.
ideally, you want to
Oof.
be able to move around, run around at full 60 hertz, but you want those aliens still probably operating at something like 15 hertz.
15. Yeah,
Same thing with
exactly.
fire rates. You want you don't want your shotgun to be rapid fire.
Exactly. Exactly. Man, the potential here is nuts. So I
But
saw in there.
should I?
What?
Oh,
Go for it. Do it. Anything.
we're still streaming, right?
Yeah.
Or have I lost connection?
Uh oh. Can you hear me? Uh oh. We might be having that hiccup again.
Oh, are we back?
Are you back? Can
Yeah,
you hear
I
me?
think yeah, I think we had a little bit of an internet hiccup there,
Okay.
but
Your
un-
stream never stopped moving though, interestingly.
weird. Okay.
So,
Well, should I go ahead and like demo some other stuff while we're at it here?
yeah, let's
Or
do it, man. Let's go.
all
Let's
right,
see what else you
cool.
got on this.
All right. So the big thing that I've done is Cybermorph at completely native resolution. And so the intro and stuff here is still original, Jaguar
That's pixel
resolution.
art, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, and
And
that
once we
that's
get into
3D.
the actual game, oops.
Wow. Yeah, even through the like you can still kind of see this stuff through this low quality Discord video, but I
Right.
can tell that the edges are much smoother on the polygons there.
Yeah. And
Wow.
so all the polygons are being rendered natively. The background is actually also a native polygon that's being interpolated, sourced from the
Huh.
original CRY game colors that were basically it's a blitter gradient, so I had to do some work to translate that. And all the sprites are even bilinear filtered.
Yeah, that's nuts. Actually, the CRY color gradient thing, that's one of the more unique aspects of the Jag. It can do some
Yeah,
really smooth gradients, but it kind of it's like, if I recall, it's like there's a it doesn't it's like between white and like pure red for and then pure blue, pure green kind of thing.
so
Or
your components are cyan, red, and
that's right.
intensity,
Okay,
and
it's
the Y
intensity.
is intensity. And
Yes.
so when you're linearly interpolating a cry value, it actually looks quite different from linearly interpolating an RGB value. And so that's
Ah,
one of the things that I've cheated with on the background here. I basically said, okay, what's the cry value to RGB at the top? What's the cry value to RGB at the bottom? And I just interpolate them as linear RGB, so it looks slightly different, but not in a way that anyone could
right,
possibly
right,
care,
right.
you know?
Exactly, exactly.
I could
Yeah,
get
I
super advanced and have a custom shader that's actually interpolating as cry and then, outputting the
that would be
fragment as
neat.
RGB, but
That
I'm
was one
not
of
that
the
crazy right
that was
now.
one of the things I liked about the Jag version of Doom is that they used that for those smooth distant gradients to
Yeah.
fade to black
Yeah.
versus like the PC version which had very obvious banding being that it was
Right.
256 color RGB.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting use of the 16-bit color space. It gets you some interesting advantages.
Wow. So this actually, seeing this then makes me think of something like Checkered Flag, right? Checkered Flag is virtually unplayable, but
Yeah.
with your emulator, it feels conceivable that somebody could write a script or adjust the game logic as well to make a version of that game that runs at a high frame rate
Yeah.
and at a high resolution.
Yeah. Well, funny you should mention that one actually, because
Oh,
let me show you here. So if basically the key to speed in this emulator, if you want things to run it, as fast as they can, is usually to make the blitter free and to disable pipeline emulation.
aha,
And
okay.
pipeline emulation is a big one because, um, you know, theoretically, those RISC chips in the Jaguar should be able to run one operation per clock, but
Right,
that's
right.
generally not the reality. You're running into stalls due to the pipeline.
Yeah.
And when you disable pipeline emulation, the emulator's just like, okay, yeah, each op is just going to cost one cycle, and that's
Wow,
really
yeah.
fast.
So you're basically just deleting the bottleneck.
And so if you do that, and we load up checkered flag here,
All right.
you will see that it runs pretty damn fast.
Okay, I'm holding my breath here, waiting. Whoa.
And the big problem with this one, though, is that steering is not really frame rate dependent. And when you're running at 60 frames per second, the steering just feels pretty bad.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the steering feels bad in this game, full stop, right? Like, but I guess it gets worse at a higher frame rate.
Of course, this could be closer to like 30 frames per second as well. I'm not entirely sure, but it feels 60-ish.
I can't see through the Discord stream because I'm not paying for Nitro. So this is a 30 FPS stream, but it's still significantly smoother because I think the Checkered Flag normally runs under 10 frames per second. It's in like the 5 to 10 range for sure. Basically the same as Stunt Race FX on Super NES, but the game itself is much faster and twitchier, making it hard
Yeah.
to play. Unfortunately, wow, this is amazing, dude. You're
But yeah, I
taking
think with a little bit of tweaking, this could also be made to play at 60 hertz, and it would feel much better.
and possibly with high res rendering like Cybermorph,
Yep.
dude.
Yeah,
Man,
this is another one where I think it would be relatively easy to hook in that high-res rendering stuff. And let's see here. I'm gonna go ahead and stop streaming here.
okay, I'll switch back to the other here. Actually, just
On
for
it.
kicks, let me load up Cybermorph, or sorry, Checkered Flag on the real Jag here.
Yeah, for contrast.
So everyone watching can see what this really runs like.
Yeah,
There, I switch back to you. All right.
cool.
So check this out. All right, you guys just witnessed that. Even through Discord cam, you could see that it was running at a smooth frame rate, right? This, oh my, this is something. So let's jump in here. Here we go. It's looking like Checkered Flag, but then the frame rate and oh, look at this. Woohoo. It's, oh man, this thing, it's so slow. Look at that. I mean, like Virtua Racing on the Sega Genesis with that SVP chip runs significantly better than this.
Yep.
And Virtua Racing on 32X is much more impressive as well. So I feel like games like this really painted a negative picture of the Jag, and it's kind of like contributed to its failure.
Yeah.
Because like you see this compared to like anything else, like the 3DO, for instance, had like the need for speed, right? And you see
Yeah.
that running versus this, and it's just like it's not even close. And it's a shame because I'm fairly confident the Jag could do better than this, right? Like,
Yeah, I definitely think so. I haven't reverse engineered checker flag enough in particular to be like I know exactly what I would optimize, but just fundamentally, I think there's probably some stuff they could be doing that they aren't. And one of the first things I always think of is trying to utilize the GPU as a cache more often, and minimizing the size of your GPU program so that you can do like really tiny programs dedicated to just blasting out triangles, but also using as much of that memory as you can to cache off data and be rendering from sourcing from as you're like generating your triangles from that memory as much as you can, even though it's only 4 kilobytes, so that's hard.
Yeah, for sure. And real quick, to answer a question that somebody had there, this is running on real hardware right now. So we are looking at an actual Jaguar running. So this is how it runs on the real deal. What you were seeing before was your emulator running much smoother.
And
So
another one is World Tour Racing. That's a Jaguar CD game,
I wonder if
and that one tends to run pretty badly on hardware. But also that's another one. The emulator will make it run at basically like 60 hertz, and it could use some tweaking for 60 as well. But I think it actually, as it is, even feels really good that way.
Dang, I don't seem to have it on here. That's annoying.
Oh yeah, that's one of the ones that isn't compatible with the Jaguar game drive yet, is my understanding.
Let's see if I have any. The game drive has not been playing nicely with Jag CD stuff. I'll just try one to see what happens. If it crashes, it crashes. And we will load up the Rayman port as well, because Rayman, I think, is one of the most impressive games in the Jag.
Yeah.
Even though it's 2D, it's beautiful and it runs so smooth.
Yeah.
Man. Here we go.
But yeah, I think that the really impressive thing about the whole native resolution rendering with Cybermorph is just the fact that like it was about 150 line script to do that initially. I've since extended it. It's more like 350, but that's because I'm going all the bells and whistles and adding like bilinear interpolation to the textures and stuff.
So wait, how are you doing that exactly? Is that like being something you're interpreting through like the outside of what the Jag would theoretically be able to do, or
Yeah. So the Jaguar doesn't know what like a triangle or a polygon is, right? It's just got the blitter, and it's up to these GPU programs that developers write to kind of set up like how I'm going to draw this triangle line by line using the blitter based on whatever my input information is. And so what the script does is it basically it recognizes as the game is uploading these different GPU programs, it identifies which is which, and it will then say, oh, this is the GPU program it's going to use to try to render these triangles. So it writes a custom opcode in, and that custom opcode will basically call a custom script function as soon as it gets to drawing that triangle. It'll read a bunch of stuff out of memory to get the properties of the triangle, then submit a native triangle. And the other cool part of this is that like when it's actually rendering, when the game is rendering a frame, it's usually not rendering what is actually going to be next visible on screen. It's usually double or triple buffered.
Sure, yeah.
And so what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, well, each frame buffer address can have like a polygon and texture list associated with it. And so I'm adding all this geometry to that list. And then once the object processor comes around and it's actually going to put something on screen, it's checking the addresses against this map of polygons and textures. And if something matches, then it'll say, okay, this is the set of polygons and textures to render along with this particular object in the object processor. And that keeps all of the polygon stuff nice and synchronized with everything else. And so it's like, it's a pretty elegant system in that there's not a lot of code needed to hook into all that, and I think it should be able to be pretty adaptable for other games as well.
Wow, this feels like the opportunity that could also lead to additional Jaguar homebrew games, right? Like, I feel like one of the limiting factors was many people did not have access to a Jaguar, right? So it's difficult to want to build a game for it. Whereas now that this emulator is becoming accessible and so powerful, it seems like there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, there's the next thing I'm working on is like full debugger integration as well, specifically catered for developers, make it easier to write software for it. And I think even just the scripting system will be immensely valuable for developers as well, because you can do stuff like set a programmatic breakpoint. You probably know what code address you want to stop on if you're having a bug you want to track down. So you can actually write a script that just adds a breakpoint to that location, And then once you're at that location, you can use more script functions to query more about the state of the system, or you can, do different things to state and memory to kind of troubleshoot and debug and stuff like that. So I don't think developers have really had a nice tool for that kind of stuff
No,
either.
exactly. That's right. Developing for the Jag, not easy.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
There is a huge developer community for it. So
that's true. But a lot of the stuff that's been at least released has been mostly like Atari ST ports. That
yeah,
just
there is a lot of that. I know like CJ Reboot is one of the guys that's doing a lot of those things. But he's also making some pretty damn cool proprietary stuff. I don't know if you've checked it out, like Jumping at Shadows, I think it's called.
Oh
It's
yeah,
one of
yeah, yeah.
his,
That is cool.
yeah,
That is cool.
yeah. It's kind of a work in progress still, but it looks like it's shaping up to be like a really interesting platformer, and it's pretty cool that it's a Jag exclusive.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really cool. I really hope we see more of this stuff because it is. It seems like a fun challenge to build a Jaguar game as well. There's a lot of incentive to try to do something that's not been done before on this hardware. I think
Yeah.
that could lead to some cool results.
Yeah.
Speaking of unusual, are you familiar with Skyhammer here that I'm playing?
A little bit. I've played it a little bit myself, but
So this is a game that I believe was made. I think it was made by Rebellion as well. So this would have been the game they made after Alien vs Predator. I'm
yeah.
pretty sure. I think I got that right. If I got that wrong, I'll find out shortly. But I believe it's Rebellion that did this, and it came out either very late or in some weird. I actually have a box copy of this, but I feel like it came out after the Jag was dead. So it's a
Yeah,
very strange release, but it's kind of
think
impressive.
I think this might be one of the ones that's like missing from the retail Wikipedia list, for
Yeah,
whatever
exactly.
reason. I don't know what
Exactly.
criteria they use for that, but
It's definitely a later release though. But real quick, it looks like we have a donation from the Ozone Nightmare for $5. Ozone Nightmare is awesome. He's a friend of the show as well. And then we have $5 from Afflicted here, who says, and this is for you, Rich. Thanks for your work. I hope you feel better, Rich. Are you planning on building a native Linux port of your emulator? I'd love to play Jaguar on my Batocera Linux build.
yeah, well, first, thank you very much. And second, lots and lots of ports are on the agenda. Linux, 64 bits, ARM 32 and 64 bits, native ports are on the agenda there.
Awesome.
And then I'll probably do some custom tailored stuff for the various Linux distributions. I don't know how much will really be necessary there or how much I'll get into, but yeah, it's definitely on the agenda, along with Mac OS ports as well, I should mention.
Oh, heck yeah. No, that's awesome. Okay. And then we have another one from Nolasco who says, who can forget Do the Math commercial? Thanks for the live stream, my dudes. Thank you very much. And yeah, somebody mentioned that we could try Bubsy, but Audie's not here. Audie was going to try to be here, but he was tied up with something else, unfortunately, so it's just us tonight. But that doesn't mean we can't play some Bubsy. This is the worst. No, it's not the worst. It's one of the worst Bubsy games, though. This Jag version. This is real bad.
Yeah, I cannot, can't stand a whole lot of it myself.
Oh man! But before we get to I will have to do that at some point. But I should probably play a good game here.
It wouldn't surprise me if like one of the most egregious bugs in the emulator is in Bubsy because it's gotten the least amount of testing.
Perfectly understandable. It's virtually unplayable. That's one of those games that has that weird level design where it's just like floating random objects. I always call that budget Amiga design because you saw a lot of Amiga platformers where they just have like floating things in the background, and it's like a bad Amiga platform.
Yeah, I always think of Aladdin for the Sega Genesis as like that's how you make a very coherent side-scrolling game where you can like feel what's around you even though you can't see it. It's just
Right.
done so well in that regard. And then you have Bubsy on the other end of the spectrum.
You feel nothing. It's just like nonsense.
Yeah.
And then Rodimus Prime 29 asks, "Do you have the Bruce Lee game?" Of course we do. We can play that too. So Rayman, this is an interesting one though. So this was originally supposed to be a Jag exclusive, if I recall, but it did get ported around. I've actually looked closely at this in a DF retro I did on PS1's launch, and I did determine that the Jaguar version technically is actually the worst version, but that doesn't mean it's not an awesome version. The main thing is it's lacking a lot of parallax scrolling compared to PlayStation, Saturn, and PC. So those all have like multiple layers all crisscrossing in front of each other, whereas the Jag only has like one layer. And also the sound, I would say, is significantly worse. But I still think this is an awesome version of the game. The fact that it looks this good, beautiful 2D pixel art, and it runs at 60 frames per second, unlike so many other games on here. It's an awesome release. Look at that.
Yep.
Also, the thing about Rayman 1, I don't know if you've looked closely at the different versions, but every version has a different mix of background choices. So, like, this first stage on other versions has a completely different background, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to another stage that's that way as well. And then there's stuff like the music level in this game on Jaguar, the shiny metallic note bars or whatever that you run around on. On here, they have friction, whereas in the other versions, it's like sliding on ice, right? So you get a lot of momentum and you slide around the level. So it's completely different gameplay. But yeah. This one, though, there's really not much, I guess, you could do to enhance this, right? Like, this is just 2D pixel art, other than run it correctly on the emulator. Uh-oh, I think his internet connection is dipping again. Rich, your internet. Chat, let him know that his internet is dropping again. Oh, there he went. I just figured he didn't have a lot to say about Rayman. I mean, I could sit here and talk about Rayman all night. Like how not only are there all those background differences, but just like difference. Like I discovered, like even like the PlayStation 1 version, like the Japanese version of the PS1 game, has different sound effects compared to, in some spots, compared to the US version. So they just like remixed backgrounds, changed where music tracks play, made little tweaks to the levels, and like every version is different. And I have no idea why. It's so strange. But he's turned into Rayman. But hey, we got David Johnston here with $5. I appreciate that. Thanks for sticking with us through these technical hiccups. You can just hear me talk more about Batilla the Fairy. As you can see, Batilla the Fairy, I think she was specific to Rayman 1, and it was more like other fairies came alive in the 3D sequels. But yeah, unfortunately, the sound in this game, I never thought the Jag version sounded very good. The music is just a little bit off. Also, the Jag version of Rayman is easier than the other versions. Significantly so. This one I'd say is quite simple. It's not easy, but it's quite possible to finish. Where the other ones, you have to collect all of these what I forget they're called, the Protoons or something. But you have to collect them all in every level to unlock the final area, and it's just brutal. I've done it once. Oh wait. He's back.
Hey, sorry about that.
There we go. We're back. I can always tell when I'm talking and all of a sudden you don't respond. And it's like, I guess he doesn't have anything to say about it. All right.
No, before I got disconnected there, I was going to say this game, I think, is actually a really good example of doing just what I said, like trying to minimize use of the blitter, relying heavily on the object processor, because the object processor can do its own independent scaling and stuff like that. It just can't do like the rotation type stuff that the blitter tends to be useful for. Right. And as you can see, you know, when you just use those components that you need to, and you're mindful of, you know, bus contention on this system, you can do some pretty nice stuff.
Yeah, so this is very smartly designed then, and it's one of the few that really feels like it's built well within the constraints of the Jaguar.
Yeah.
Man. I guess one thing I'm curious about, I feel like whenever people talk about the Jaguar, it always comes up, the whole 64-bit claim.
Yeah.
And I would say, I mean, I actually want to hear you first. Like, would you say that their marketing was deceptive, or would you agree that this is actually a 64-bit system?
Yeah, I mean it's all kind of bullshit, I think.
Yeah.
Like like there are 64 bits like bus path elements and stuff like that, but when it comes down to it, for me, what defines the bitness of a system has always been the CPU register width. That's what defines like modern 64-bit stuff. It's like, oh, we
Right.
switched from 32-bit registers to 64-bit registers, and so every CPU in the Jaguar is it has 32-bit registers. So
It's
there you have it.
32-bit.
It's a
It's
32-bit
32-bit.
system.
And I think there's nobody better to speak on that than you right now. So we've got the official word. The Jaguar is 32-bit. Do the math. That's
Indeed.
the actual math.
Of course, it does have, read and write phrase instructions, and it does stuff phrase at a time, and that's 8 bits at a time instead of 4 bits at a time for the blitter to take advantage of some of those bus paths. So that's where the 64-bit stuff comes from. But yeah, there's no good reason to use that to qualify the system as 64-bit. So
Yeah, I think there was no reason to either in a sense, because just being a 32-bit RISC-based system in 1993 is impressive enough, right?
yeah. What they should have bragged about is, we designed our own custom silicon for this motherfucker. That would be way more impressive.
Yeah, exactly. Aside from, I guess, the Motorola 68,000, like everything else is like custom, which is nuts.
Yep.
And you didn't see that very often. Maybe it was foolish, but it was cool.
Yeah, exactly. And there are definitely some quirks of those custom RISC chips, and right after write hazards, I think it is a big thing that ended up biting tons of developers. Ended up biting me writing the emulator because there are some pretty crazy timing situations that you can get into if you're not being cycle accurate in a lot of cases. Like one was I think missile command. When we were doing Atari 50, we had a bug where you could just leave it in attract mode, and eventually it would go and load up the demo level, and it would just lock the emulator up.
Oh.
And it turned out that it was doing something, I think, on the GPU, where basically it would start a load into a register, and that load, comes with variable latency because it was a load from external memory, so it could be subject to, is the blitter running right now, is another CPU have bus priority right now, and so it would start that load up, do a bunch of operations, exit out into another function entirely, then that new function would write the register that it had previously loaded into. And in the emulator, of course, it would be like, oh yeah, that load's done. So go ahead and write into the register with this new instruction and continue on. And that was the source of the problem, because on hardware, it was actually taking so long for that load, all those instructions, however many cycles in between entering into a brand new function, that load would still complete after, in the pipeline, after this other instruction had executed and written this register. And so, getting that degree of accuracy where it's like, oh yeah, well these other components are running an external memory latency is taking this long, and that was totally a bug in the original software that they just hadn't run into.
Right.
Because
exactly.
they happened to be abusing the bus, the memory bandwidth enough at that time that it just never surfaced on hardware. But if they'd done that while they didn't have the blitter running, for example, and it took a couple cycles off that memory access, then it would have crashed on hardware too. And to go even more in depth than that one befuddled me for a while. So I ended up writing this test harness on hardware, where basically I took the entire save state from the emulator, I crammed it into a ROM image along with the actual missile command ROM image, and the retail, the silicon actually has still some debugging options so that you can put the RISC chips into single step mode, and basically have the 68K driving those things like a debugger, just stepping one instruction at a time.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and so I had this whole framework set up to step one instruction at a time and figure out exactly what the state of everything was. And I was like stepping on hardware, stepping on the emulator, being like, what's different here? And it turned out when I did that, it crashed on hardware too, because I was interrupting that memory latency, which was causing it to, fall through and not up that register late like it would in normal runtime
Right.
circumstances. So it's like I call it a quantum bug because when watched, it behaved completely differently.
So actually that makes me wonder then, what was that one of, if not, like, what was the most difficult part of developing this emulator? Is there any specific bugs or weird behavior in games that you ran into that kind of confused you for a while?
Yeah, that was definitely one of the big ones, I'd say. Just in general, I think getting like the last 5% of the library running properly was probably at least 50% of the effort. Just the intense amount of debugging, figuring out edge cases, figuring out where my timing was wrong and why, and then trying to think creatively of how can I make my timing more faithful to hardware without destroying performance and while still running on a single 1 gigahertz Nintendo Switch core.
Yeah. Wait, so what were some of those edge case games then?
um, Edge case in terms of like
Of, like,
just having stuff that was really hard to emulate.
Yeah. Part of that last 5% of the library that gave you trouble.
I think Iron Soldier was one of them. Let's see. Maybe Ruin or Pinball was in there for a little bit. Like it ran okay, but then it had a whole bunch of different like right after right hazard cases and all kinds of obscure bugs and timing things that surfaced after it had been running for a bit. Let's see. Here. Actually, it'd be easier if I consult the actual game list. They'll trigger my PTSD and I'll remember them.
Oh no. I'll load up one of those actually. Let's
see here.
Let's see here. So yeah, Iron Soldier. That is an interesting one. 3D mech game. Oh, that's right. Thinking of Iron Soldier, I recently, oh man, I'm blanking on his name, but I got one of those adapters for the Nuon, so I can finally play Nuon games. And a sequel, Iron Soldier 3 is on the Nuon.
Cool.
The Nuon is basically, if you're not aware, it's basically the spiritual successor to the Jag. Like, it has a sequel to Atari cards, Merlin Racing. It has Tempest 3000. Has Iron Soldier 3. But it doesn't have many more games than that, to be honest. But still, it was pretty much like the next Jaguar.
Oh yeah, White Men Can't Jump. That was another high voltage game that had all kinds of crazy timing and hazard issues. And Powers 2 was not too hard to get running, but it did have some interesting timing stuff that was causing it to like flicker and do all kinds of crazy stuff in the emulator. I had to work through that.
Oh. Yeah, this Iron Soldier menu is pretty cool though. It's got 60 FPS cube update.
Yeah.
Which, hey, there's something to be said for that. And 60 FPS wireframes. Look at that.
Indeed.
I will give them credit for that.
Yeah, this is one of the games that actually does run pretty respectably in-game as well, I think, for what it's, attempting on the hardware.
I agree. This actually looks surprisingly good. How do I move though? Oh yeah, you hold A button. And press up and down to control the throttle.
The controls are they take a bit of getting used to on this one.
Yeah, they're trying to be like a Mech Warrior style game, which is interesting. Oh, it's actually rotating the.
Yeah, you can independently swivel the head from the body as well.
Yeah. How do I actually? Oh yeah, it has destruction.
Yeah, the building destruction is definitely the coolest feature of this thing, and Iron Soldier 2, same thing. Like they went a little above and beyond. I noticed in the second one, making like textures appear on the buildings from further away and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And it still seems to perform pretty nicely. But just like the particles and the wreckage and everything that come down when you destroy buildings, it's quite satisfying in
it
this game,
is.
I should say.
Actually, the explosions kind of remind me of GoldenEye on N64. It has that quality to it. Oh
Yeah.
man, this what a
I remember those remote mines and just like stacking those things up. You get those massive smoke plumes, so it bring the game down to like 2 frames per second.
yeah, exactly. All right, so if I turn this that way and then rotate that, there we go. That's how I adjust my heading. I'm just getting shot to heck. Yeah, this is definitely one of the most impressive games on there in terms of fluidity. It really runs quite well.
Yeah.
I would not complain about the performance on this. These guys did a good job.
Yep.
Actually, thinking of that, so is there any specific game that comes to mind that you would say is you would classify as perhaps the most impressive game on the Jag that you experienced, or the one that seemed to pull off the most technically impressive tricks?
It's hard to say there. Like Rayman, I think in its own way utilizes
Yeah.
the hardware really well, even though it's not doing anything super impressive.
Yep.
Iron Soldier here, I think, is one of the more impressive games that actually does do like a full 3D world and does it at a pretty reasonable playable frame rate.
Yeah.
And I guess it's not really an official title or whatever, I guess, but Battlesphere is another one
Oh yeah.
that performance on that thing is quite impressive. And of course, usually you're flying through space, you don't have a whole lot of actual polygons to be rendering, but even when you get up close into like a space station or something, it maintains performance pretty well. So I was pretty
Yeah.
impressed by that one. That was like the most impressive aftermarket title to me.
Yeah, that one is cool. That unfortunately, that being a CD game, those aren't working right now on my game drive. Most of them.
There's a card version of Battlesphere,
Oh, is there?
Battlesphere Gold floating around. Yep.
I wonder if I have that on this card. Actually, let me check.
I can send
Oh,
it to
click
you
in
if you
there.
don't. But that might be that. I shouldn't say that. That's naughty. Support
No, you
the
did
developers.
exactly.
You
You were just you said the quiet part loud by accident. It's okay.
know.
Wait, there we go. Oh, okay, it is actually okay. What am I thinking of then? That's there's a CD game that I'm confusing it with. Then is Battlesphere on CD? Is there a Battlesphere on CD?
There might have been CD distributions. Like I don't know how that all went down. Like
I'm
maybe
forget.
Gold was a CD distribution or something
Maybe
initially.
no, I'm thinking of Battlemorph. Maybe
Oh yeah, that's definitely a CD game.
that's what I'm thinking
Which
of. That's
Yeah,
it.
Battlemorph is basically Cybermorph done better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's definitely it runs better. It's got a better draw distance, more interesting game mechanics. It's pretty cool game.
I can see Battlesphere, Battlemorph. Yeah, okay, I can see. I can actually. Okay, looking at that title screen, that reminded me of something. Maybe you can speak to this. The Atari graphics like format it uses for 2D art in a lot of games, it resembles a highly compressed like image, right? Like
Oh
a
yeah,
bad JPEG image. Can you
they
explain
called it
why?
yeah
That
yeah they called it BPEG. And they
okay?
basically wrote a custom JPEG decoder and encoder for
So
the Jaguar.
it really is JPEG
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, it literally is. And, there's some slight differences, I think, in like the quantization tables and stuff that they use, but it's basically JPEG, and they have a GPU-driven BPEG decoder that they use for it. I don't know if Battlestar is integrating that or if they rolled their own thing, but it's really common among the Jaguar library. I'd say like 10% of the library, if not more, is using BPEG files.
Yeah, and it's quite noticeable. I think. I
Yeah.
when played over composite video, it's not that bad, but when you play in RGB or via an emulator, obviously, it's extremely obvious.
Yeah, and they needed that card space, but I think going with the JPEG-based compression was probably a poor choice.
Yeah.
There are much better domain-specific, lossless or less lossy things that you can do for image compression, even back then. Um, and I guess, zlib decompression is pretty expensive, so it would have added to their load times a good bit over BPEG. But you know, I think some combination of like basic Huffman and LCS without some of the other overhead of zlib probably would have been a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, battle morph. Wait, Battlesphere Gold.
Battlesphere, yeah.
I don't know, I'm getting this confused. Yes, this does actually look quite nice, and this type of space dogfight simulation was rather in vogue at the time.
Yeah.
So it was nice. Although, like you said, this came out, I guess, post Jag's death, so
Yeah,
it's not exactly official.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly when it came out. I think it was around 2000, something like that.
Yeah.
But,
I think it is a similar situation to Skyhammer, perhaps, where it was like a thing that was done, but it was. Actually, I'm gonna look that up real quick, because I am curious about that. So yeah, Skyhammer came out in 2000. It was intended to be released during the Jaguar's life, but then it got released later, and it was indeed Rebellion that made it. So, and I suspect it's the same here with Battlesphere. So let me check that out. Yeah, same kind of thing. Original release was canceled, got picked up, relaunched in 2000, and then Gold came out in 2002. Yeah, wow, that's interesting stuff.
I think another thing they did a pretty good job for the Jaguar was the Wolf 3D port. Actually, like I've noticed like how much faster that runs than Doom.
It does.
And they did some interesting stuff there. Like the whole thing is running at V mode 3. I can't remember how that equates to a scan out resolution, but it's basically something in the area of like 256-ish on the horizontal resolution.
That was very common back then.
Dropped out again here.
256 by 224. Oh, he dropped out again. So I'm actually get a switch here. We can still see him, but it's just not.
It's still working.
It's still working.
So just.
Oh, here we are again. Reconnect.
Hey, we're back.
Is that working?
Yep.
All okay, right. Yeah. Every time you drop out, we can still see you just fine. It just you can't hear us, or you can't hear me. So that's what's been going on. It's very strange.
Yeah, this time instead of actually going and unplugging my cable modem, I'm like, oh, this is getting weird. So I pinged Google. Google's still responding on ping. So I'm like, oh, okay. Well, maybe I'll just try reconnecting. So yeah, I'll do that next time. But anyway, so yeah, I was saying that it's basically rendering at a lower horizontal resolution the whole game, even the HUD, and then stretching it back out, so they get a bit of a performance boost out of that.
Yeah, that was very common back then. Super NES, Sega, or NES, those were like the primary resolutions used, 256 by 224.
Yep.
Which on a good any CRT, that still looks perfectly reasonable, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good way to save on resources. Yeah. That's interesting that they did it here, though.
And this is, I think, probably maybe one of the still best actual Wolf ports you can play, because it's debatable, but they rated all the graphics, and they later I think used these graphics on like the iOS versions and stuff like that. But they censored them, so they removed like all the Nazi memorabilia. You don't see Hitler anymore, which is like normally I'm like, okay, fuck Nazis, but that's killing Nazis is what this game's about.
Exactly, that's what you're supposed to do. That's the goal, man. Exactly, and yeah, like the quality of the sprite work has been increased significantly, especially on the weapon right there. Like if you remember the original weapon sprite in Wolf 3D is pretty bad. Like it's very low res, and here it looks fantastic.
Yep.
Super sharp, and it's a match. It's a match for the rest of the graphics in terms of res, which was not the case in the original. Yeah, this port Actually, so maybe you can answer a question that I've had about this as well. It was common on Jeg and 3DO specifically. Like, okay, so it runs totally smooth here, right? No problem. But then you walk up to the wall, and as soon as you put your face up to a texture, the frame rate just drops significantly. And then it speeds up again. What is it that it's doing that causes it to drop so much?
So it's kind of a concept of fill rate, because basically it's causing this splitter operation that's doing a read from a texture and a write to the frame buffer to be much larger to occupy more of the screen. And when you have more of the floors and the ceilings in view, you know, that's like much faster because it's a much faster blit operation.
Ah, so it's just it's a blitter bottleneck basically.
Yep.
Interesting. So that's that happens in a lot of 3DO stuff as well, and that works quite differently from the Jag. So
yeah, it's got its own like I can't remember exactly how it works. I know it has like a dedicated triangle renderer and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine it's a similar concept where, you know, having to do more fetches from memory for something like a texture, especially if it's got a cache. Something about that texture might invalidate the cache and force it to do more actual memory reads.
Right, so it just slows the whole thing down.
Yeah.
But still, you know, because this is obviously like a software kind of rendered game using the Jags, like blitter and everything, you don't get any of the nasty texture warping you get on, like, say, a hardware rendered PlayStation game, right?
Yeah, and you know, another interesting thing about the Jaguar is that they actually went out of their way to provide instructions on the GPU that would allow you to do real perspective correct projection if you really wanted to, like if you really wanted to spend those cycles. So like it was actually, you know, kind of more capable of producing nice 3D images than the PlayStation was, albeit at probably a CPU cost and memory cost you didn't want to pay. So
exactly. Real quick, we got a super chat from the Ozone Nightmare again. Thank you, Joe. Who says, there's a beautiful simplicity to these games. I'm all for ultra-polished modern graphics, but I enjoy letting my mind fill in the world a bit. I think there's something to be said for that, for sure.
Yeah, definitely agree.
And I also see a comment down there, and this is what I thought as well, but I wasn't sure, but the 3DO uses quads, like the Saturn, and Sega's model... No, wait, I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember if they're arcade or
you mean like their Titan hardware?
No, the Titan is based on Saturn, but I'm trying to think if I think the Model 2 and 3 and maybe Model 1 were quad based as well.
Yeah, I'm not familiar, so I couldn't say for sure.
But that, I guess back then it hadn't necessarily been decided yet that triangles were the way to go for rasterizing 3D graphics, and you did get these kind of like these different attempts at it, right?
I know that like the Saturn had a really big problem where, you know, you basically weren't able to, if you had to like clip your quad at the side of the frustum or something, right, you weren't able to basically compensate the UV coordinates for that, so you would end up squishing it, and that would still draw that complete texture in that squished quad basically. And so people had to just tessellate the hell out of all their environments in order to minimize how visible that was. And you tend to have games with like borders over the sides and stuff so that you can't see the geometry deforming as it reaches the edge of the frustum. And so it was a really interesting design choice there.
That's actually, I mean, that the kind in a different way, but that was also what we saw on PlayStation a lot, where to essentially sidestep the affine texture swim, developers would basically tessellate the environments. So like as you get close to the camera, you get a dense triangle mesh to make up for it, to try to hide it, but obviously that was more expensive to render, whereas like on N64, which has proper perspective correct texturing, they could just slap together two gigantic triangles and make a nice flat plane, no problem.
Yep.
So that's pretty fun. Yeah, the thing about Saturn that's interesting is how it's effectively like distorted sprites, those quads.
Yeah.
Did you ever see that Tomb Raider video I did on DF?
I don't think so.
There's a way to sort of hack Tomb Raider on the Saturn to unwarp its sprites, or like basically the quads, right? So they all suddenly became forward-facing squares, forward-facing quads. So you're just basically running through the environment, and all of the the perspective that is projecting into the environment is disabled, and you just see sprites. And it looks completely wild. I'll show that to you later. It's pretty interesting to see what happens when you disable that on the Saturn.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But yeah, I do love how all these different machines back then were basically attempting different ways to try to render out 3D because it was so expensive to perform. Like, well, we'll come up with different solutions. And I'd say N64 is probably the only one that's kind of resembles what we have today, right?
Yeah, they definitely, I don't know what the hardware expenses were like there and like how it compared to the other consoles, but it did feel like miles above in terms of, visual fidelity and all that. Obviously that was another console though, where if you were using it as it was designed, it was really hard to actually hit 60 frames per second.
Yes. So there's only like less than 10 games that are 60 FPS on N64, whereas I've calculated on PlayStation it's somewhere over 200, and on Saturn it's also similar. That does include some 2D games, I believe, but there's a lot of 3D games that are 60 FPS on Saturn and PlayStation.
Yeah.
But not so much on N64.
Indeed.
But still, it was doing a lot more, so I can give it that.
Yeah, definitely.
We do have a super chat here from Jimmy Arms, who says, thank you, Jimmy. He says, on the Jag board, there are sockets for 4 megabytes of RAM. What is the possibility to add the missing 2 megabytes?
I'm not actually sure how that would work, because basically your 2 megabytes is by default mirrored from basically 0 up to 8 megs. And so maybe it's designed so that if you plug something in there, it would actually map that to that mirrored region. But then, of course, the software would have to be specifically written for that. And anything that was written to, rely on that mirroring by like overrunning the buffer and being like, oh yeah, I'll just wrap back around or whatever, would break. So.
Yeah, the only console I can think of off the top of my head that actually allowed memory expansion, not officially, but in the aftermarket, was the original Xbox. You can upgrade that to 128 megabytes of RAM, and that allows you to run some arcade games that ran on the Chihiro board, which was Xbox based, and you can then run them on an original Xbox. And I believe you could also enhance. I think somebody got the Xbox port of Doom 3 running at 720p on an original Xbox, which is insane. I need to double check that for sure, but there's definitely been some mods to increase rendering resolutions on modded Xboxes with more RAM. So that is cool. But yeah, it sounds like on the Jag that would not work, given how. I mean, I guess conceivably if you did it, you'd have to write new software to take advantage of it, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if I imagine, like, I'm not familiar with that hardware involved there enough to know, but I imagine you'd have to do some extra work to actually get it to map in. I don't think just popping a chip in there would do that mapping, but unless, there is some functionality in there I'm not aware of, it's possible.
That's right. By the way, have you ever had a chance to use the spinner controllers for the Jag?
I have, actually. My friend John was kind enough to donate one so I could test it out.
Excellent.
And
I've
been meaning to, so like, it gets a little complicated using it on a PC, because basically the way that thing works is that it's generating a waveform, effectively, of signal that is saying, okay, this is this is how much this thing is moving at this time in this direction. And the polarity of that signal is determined by the order, I think, of values in this bit stream. And so that basically the rate that you need to be able to read those values is higher than you can possibly read them on like any human interface device through Windows. So you can't just read that stuff and then like pass it through. And so
right.
The solution for that the creator of the Jaguar adapter has come up with is to basically pre-translate that into mouse input. And so,
Oh, okay.
yeah, in theory, it should be able to work that way. And mouse input is still actually on my to-do list for the emulator, so I'm
That's
planning to
cool.
try it out and see if it like actually feels like it does on hardware.
Yeah, maybe I'll. I actually have one of the rotary controllers here as well, so I could bust that out for Tempest, which
Cool.
is always fun. I got that from Nick. Person, I'm blanking on his last name, but Nick over here in Germany. If you're watching, you know who you are. You're awesome. It's a dude. Always at JagFest. When JagFest was happening. Uh, Dang, did this just crash? This game? Dang.
I've
Oh,
noticed my game drive tends to crash a lot just randomly, and then the reboot and loading the same thing works out fine. So
let me try it again then, because Super Burnout is a rather impressive game. I think it's a nice showcase
uh,
of super scalar like 3D, which is something I wish we would have seen more of
yeah,
actually on the system, because it seems to be well suited for this.
yeah, it runs great, looks great. Um, I don't know how the hell to play the thing, honestly. Like I feel like I'm terrible at it.
It is weirdly difficult. I agree. Well, it's crashed again. It's weird. I mean, I don't need to do it right now, but I could always. I do have this on cartridge out in the hall that I could grab it, but
I could stream it on the emulator if you want.
that's one that probably doesn't benefit too much, though, huh? Because
Yeah, I mean,
it.
it feels like it's running about the same as it does on hardware. It feels like it's, pretty 60 across the board there.
What do I have on? Let's see what else I got on here. Prototypes. Barkley Shut Up and Jam prototype. Let's see here.
Yeah, I've come
Early
across
prototype.
some of those Barclay prototypes, and unless I'm mistaken, it seems like they just play themselves.
Oh,
Like there's no real interaction with the player.
right. Now this one though, Thea Realm Fighters. You familiar with that whole situation? Where they got some
Isn't
of
it
the
like a Kasumi Ninja prototype or something?
So this is a game that was, I believe, this is the one that involved like Daniel Pacina and other actors that worked on Mortal Kombat,
Oh,
and they
and it
lent.
was going to be the MK3 port or something.
It
Yeah.
wasn't going to be related to Mortal Kombat because those guys had ended up falling out with Midway after Mortal
Okay.
Kombat 2, and then they worked on this game because Mortal
Okay.
Kombat 3 changed all the characters, so they used different actors, I think.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I keep hearing about MK3 port that was in progress for the Jaguar, but I don't know if anything actually materialized from that.
I don't think there's anything on that out there. Oh come on, is this not running? It's not. It just frozen up. I mean, I can't. This prototype, I know it works, but maybe I got the wrong one. But yeah, the game drive does tend to be a little finicky sometime. I just updated the firmware too to the most recent version. Uh, Actually, Plucky Duck. What is Jack Nicholas? No, Nick. Yeah, I always get Jack Nicholas and Jack Nicholson. I would like Jack Nicholson golf, to be honest. That would be pretty good.
That that would be pretty awesome.
I could go for it. Let's see if this runs because I've not tried this one. Let it do its thing. There it goes. The Jaguar boot up. They really make an event of that, don't they?
Yeah.
Every time.
I don't know if you know, but you can actually skip it. Like what it's doing is it's
Yeah,
behind the scenes doing the BIOS decryption, and then once that finishes, it doesn't give you an indicator. But if you hit a button after that's done, it'll
that's
just be
right.
like
Yeah,
a
it does. It just lets you skip it. I prefer the boot up with the Jag CD attached. It's got a
yeah.
nice look to it.
Yeah.
So
And that one actually picks a random one each time, and it's storing it. It's got 128
oh,
bytes of SRAM on that CD unit that it's using for like which boot up sequence it last used, which I thought was interesting.
oh man. So this is actually a little playable demo here. They cautioned that it was okay. Game flow. Yeah. So this is clearly not. Yeah. This is a very very simple prototype thing with like one hole.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We got another one from Jimmy Arms here. It says, any progress on setting up BigPEmu, BigPEmu for developer support for homebrew developers.
Yeah, so there are a few developer options already, and this scripting system is going to be, I think, a pretty huge thing for developers. I also have, in an unreleased build, mind you, I've got integration with my Oasis debugger. So basically, you can do
Ah,
all the traditional memory inspection, disassembly, stepping through and breakpointing any of the CPUs at any time. You can switch between contexts to see what the GPU is doing while you're broken on the M68K, all that good stuff. And basically, I'm cleaning that up, and I'm going to be making totally separate builds with that functionality, just because it does stuff that slows the emulator down pretty significantly. So I don't want to introduce it into the mainline builds. But obviously, this emulator has super low requirements. So if you have even a 2 GHz CPU, you're going to be fine with the dev builds. But I
that's
still
good.
want it to be like its own thing. But yeah, I'm cleaning that up, and I'm still working out some kinks and other like just random annoyances that I run into while debugging that I figure people are going to want fixed. And once all that stuff is all nice and polished, that's when I'll start publishing those separate developer builds finally. And I do apologize, it's been taking me so long. Like that was next on my Patreon list, and it's just been a bad month for productivity due to all the health stuff. So.
I understand, man. I think the community gets that. I mean, you've already done so much for everyone. I definitely appreciate it. It makes a big difference. Because this really, until you came along with this really was one of those systems that felt like it was out of reach for a lot of people. Like, yes, you could get into collecting for it, like I did as an idiot, but just to be able to experience it properly was not easily achieved before, and now you can. And it seems like we're getting into that territory where it's getting significantly better as well, which is awesome. Okay, so here we go. Well, I don't want to press. There we go. That's the right button. So this game is interesting. I think I like the way this looks.
Yeah.
It's like a nice super scalar style snowboarding game.
Yeah, it's using a very similar technique to Atari carts.
Yeah, exactly. Just with greater slopes here. The only thing, my only complaint with the game's visuals actually is that they used a digitized background, which looks completely out of place with the otherwise like drawn pixel art, right?
Yeah. It would have been a little cooler if they'd done like, I guess they do have some shifting with the slopes like up and down, which is kind of cool, but it feels like it doesn't quite like the magnitude of scale is not quite right there.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's a weird one. There's actually a version of this on Super NES, I believe. That's not quite like as good visually, but it is similar from what I recall.
Yeah.
Wow, what a weird game. Virtual Studio. Yeah, this is another one of the rare 60 FPS games for the system, for sure.
Yeah.
And this Super Burnout, stuff like that really makes me feel like it would have been interesting if more developers had gone for this sort of like pseudo 3D kind of game design. Basically like Outrun style or Space Harrier style on this thing. The system would be great for that, I think.
I mean, I keep thinking like Symphony of the Night would run perfectly as a Jaguar CD game.
Sure.
Like there's nothing stopping it, and you could totally have like just a really awesome Symphony of the Night clone for the system.
That's the kind of thing I really want to see. I know it's a big ask, but it would be cool to see the homebrew community tackle something like that.
Yeah.
I know the master of the Mega Drive palette, Pyron, down in Brazil, has been doing work on converting all of Symphony of the Night's art and such over to the Genesis Mega Drive.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff about
it's insane. Like his usage of limited color palettes is second to none. Just fantastic stuff. Really, really cool. Oh, we got another little super chat with some sweet sunglasses there from Tooth Rot, which is an unpleasant thought, Tooth Rot. But man, this there's just so many games to run through on here. I should ask everybody in the chat. Is there any other games you'd like us to tackle while we're here? Just go ahead and post it. I'll look through here in the meantime. Got these Atari ST conversions on here. Those are generally bad. I really want to play some JXCD, but I don't understand why it's not working.
You tried Battlemorph for Highlander yet?
I'm gonna try. Highlander has worked before, but I tried it today and it crashed. So I'm not even gonna touch this sequence. I'm just gonna let it go. It's just gonna do its own thing, and let's see what happens. So we get the boot screen. Okay, it's showing the video at least. Let's let it play. So we're playing some Highlander.
I lament so, like, if only they had made this in the universe of the first movie instead of the cartoon, they could have made such a badass game.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's what a weird thing. Okay, we're getting some votes in here. Wow, that's a lot. Club Drive, Primal Rage, Doom, Tempest, Doom, Club Drive. Doom was not already showcased. We didn't do Tempest yet. Attack of the Mutant Penguins. Man, there's air cars. Man. So actually, I see Segata Senshiro written in a weird way on here. You mentioned this earlier, but you should probably explain it again for them. Why Alien vs Predator runs at such a low frame rate?
Yeah, so it's artificially capped, and on NTSC it will never go above 15 hertz. On PAL it will never go above 16 hertz. And earlier I actually demonstrated a feature in my emulator where through the scripting system you can specify the V-blank count, basically, that determines how many V-blanks it'll wait in between frames, and you can uncap it. You can make it run at 60 hertz if you want, but of course game logic is coupled to frame rate, so it'll have just aliens running around like maniacs and stuff like that. But
yeah.
Basically, you know, that caps it, and the reason they did that is that, sure, you know, you've got scenes in that game where you're running at maybe 20, 30 frames per second uncapped, but there are a lot of scenes in that game that are closer to like 10 because there's a lot going on. The blitter's bogging things down. You got a lot of memory contention. And so I think they figured out, you know, let's just cap it at 15, and that way it won't feel so weird when the frame rate is fluctuating so wildly, you know.
Exactly. So there you go. And yeah, if you're just joining now or you joined late, go back earlier in this video. Once it's posted, like normal video, you can check it out, and we actually showcase that running in a new version of the emulator, running at a much higher frame rate, which is super cool. And yeah, this seems to be the issue I'm having here with this game now, and I'm not sure why. It's just crashing on this screen. It plays the video and it won't go any further. It's worked before, but not since I've updated the firmware, so bummer. Yeah, I don't know what's up with the JXCD on this. So you've obviously done work on the JXCD as well then, yeah? So what do you think of that hardware in terms of the capabilities it adds? And I mean, it doesn't seem to do much outside of CD support, but...
Yeah, basically, like, you know, it's nothing like the Sega CD where they added an actual new processor that you could do cool stuff with. It's a CD unit. I had to, you know, reverse engineer the actual CD hardware at a low level, figure out all the registers and undocumented stuff. And so everything, you know, runs faithfully just as it would on hardware. But in terms of what it adds, basically, like... you know, you get CD storage, you get CD audio, and that's about it. You know.
Dang.
And the way the audio works is actually quite interesting because they piped it through Jerry registers. So basically, to get the CD audio to come through, you tell the CD unit, okay, pipe your audio through these registers. Then you write a DSP program that reads it out of those registers and then writes it to the DAC, the digital audio converter. And so like you can do like any kind of weird effects or anything that you want on the CD audio as it's coming through, which is kind of cool. But it's also kind of weird to place an actual like software burden on the developer to play CD audio.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah,
So the man, what a thing.
yeah.
All right, I'm gonna try this again. I want to get a Jag CD game to run properly, but they don't. It just doesn't. Oh, that's not good. I would get better results on BigPEmu
That is
at this
true.
point.
100% retail compatibility.
Exactly, it's more compatible than the game drive right now. Dang. Okay, I think that new firmware seems to have messed up CD support even worse, and now nothing seems to run. That's a shame. Wonder if I can downgrade it. I'll have to mess with that. Oh man, Attack of the Mutant Penguins is just that breaks my brain. What a weird game. Fight for Life. That's a weird one. Yeah, Flashback's good on the Jag. Actually, one of the best releases, I don't know if I have it on here because it came later, was there's a conversion of Another World on Jag. That's really
I
good.
I have been trying to get my hands on that, and they did
It's
some really interesting copy protection stuff, which is why nobody's dumped it
oh,
yet.
that's why it's not dumped. Yeah.
Yeah, it basically ties both the ROM encryption and the EEPROM encryption to the individual buyer. And I
Good
have
lord.
somebody that was nice enough to send me their copy, so it's on my to-do list to go ahead and decrypt it and remove all their personal information and figure that out. Not, I don't intend to actually distribute the ROM, of course, but just for my own edification, I want to see it running in the emulator, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I can agree with that completely. So you've played it then, yeah? It's pretty cool.
No, I haven't
Oh,
actually.
okay.
Yeah, I think I might be able to, or no, I wouldn't be able to because I don't have an image of his EEPROM. So even if I put what he gave me on my game drive, it would read the EEPROM and it would fail the copy protection. So basically, I've got to
Right.
crack it before I can play it myself.
That's right. That's right. I have played it on an original cart, and it is probably the best version of that game because you get the
Cool.
proper 240p graphics running as they should. Uh, but it's the 25th or whatever anniversary edition, so it's got all the improvements from there. And you can
Right.
even unlock the frame rate up to 60 FPS if you want, but then the game runs too fast because it was not designed that way. But it shows that the game is running very smoothly on the Jag.
Yeah, I've tried to reach out to a couple people there, including I think the original publisher, to see if they'll give me an unencrypted image, and haven't gotten any replies. So if anybody's watching, you know, pretty please.
Let's see here. What? So this is one. Actually, I'm going to load this up because we talked about this before the stream, but this is another interesting one. I am a big fan of Pitfall to Mine Adventure, but the Jaguar port disappointed me immensely for running at barely 30 frames per second. Which is, I don't. Have you ever seen this game on 32x? By the way, that version is extra weird.
I don't think I played it.
So, the 32x actually like loops video through like an analog cable, right? So it like overlays 32x graphics on the Genesis graphics, right? So
Right.
in that game, the foreground is 256 color tile map, but the 32x is not fast enough to do it at 60 FPS, so it's like 30. But all the background graphics are still done by the Genesis, and they update at 60. So you have this weird mismatch where the background and foreground run at different frame rates. That's not the case on the Jag. Everything is just 30.
Right.
But I wondered if you could give some insight into why you think that this game, aside from the title screen here, also just runs at 30, considering what the hardware can do.
So I haven't really reverse engineered this one at all, and I don't know what the use of blitter to object processor is.
Okay.
Um, they may well be using the OP or the blitter to like update a lot of sprites and stuff like that, which can definitely be costly. Um, but otherwise, there is occasional rotation that I could see the blitter maybe being used for, like the swinging vines. I don't know if those are a bunch of individual frames or if they're actually using the blitter to draw rotated sprites. Um, but yeah, I don't really see anything that should
I
inherently
noticed
limit it.
every version of the game does the water trick differently. So like the water in the background here, like on Mega Drive, it's just like a scan line kind of trick, right? Where they kind of warble the scan lines back and forth each frame. But here it looks similar, but it's much chunkier and kind of different looking. I don't know what they're doing. If you ever get around to reverse engineering or looking into this game further, I will definitely be curious to learn more. Because it's puzzling
like
me.
that. Like that vine there definitely looked like smooth enough that I would guess it's probably using the blitter to draw it rotated, but
That exact same vine is on the other versions as well, but I guess they could be doing it differently on the Jag.
Yeah, people do some pretty crazy stuff with just having crap loads of frames to make things look smooth too, so.
Yeah, very possible. But yeah, this one, oof. The art looks good on the Jag though. They're using the 256 color artwork, which was also in the PC version. The PC version of this runs at 70 frames per second on a fast enough PC from that era. But it was it was one of the very first Windows 95 games ever released. I think it should. It's one. If it has DirectX at all, it must have shipped with like DirectX. I want to say DirectX 1, but I feel like no. I can't remember if any games did, and it just started with DX2.
Yeah, probably a very early version of Direct Draw would be my guess.
Yeah, that's probably right. So yeah, this game, this version is not excellent by any means. Another thing about the Jag that, man, they really picked the worst games to launch this with. Do you know the 3 games it launched with?
Cybermorph.
Yep.
I can't remember the other 2.
So there's Cybermorph, which interesting.
BigPEmu. Yeah.
That was for the CD. Yeah. Then there was Raiden, the shooter, the classic Japanese shooter.
Right.
But it was ported by either High Voltage Software or somebody else, and it runs at 30 frames per second, which is not good. Yeah. And then the last one is Trevor McFur and the Crescent Galaxy, which I think might be one of the worst launch titles of all time.
It does run well, though.
It runs well, but when you load it up, and let's say you've been playing like Thunder Force on your Super or on your Mega Drive, or you've played like even just like Gradius 3, which is a launch title for Super NES with tons of slowdown. Like just they look, play, run, and they don't necessarily run better, but like Trevor McFur has no music.
Yeah.
The level designs are completely just aimless, and just it's such a bad game, and I'm
all the art basically looks like it was like really deluxe painted by somebody who had like maybe a month experience working with deluxe paint,
Exactly. And by the way, I don't know if you can tell over the stream that you're seeing, but you see right here Pitfall is locking to 20 frames per second. So it's actually much slower than 30 even. So that whatever they're doing on the Jag here is extremely inefficient.
The water effect was obviously not worth it.
No. Wow, that's nuts. All right, let me switch back to the menu here. We'll play a few more things before we hop off. Wow, somebody reminded, I see in the comments, Fury Cubed for Windows 95. Which was basically like Terminal Velocity. I think same developer, but for Windows 95. Should we do... I feel like we can't end the stream without at least doing this once. White Men Can't Jump. Here we go. And thanks, Sega Boy, for that. Appreciate it. All right, here, man, look at this ROM. It's a 4 megabit or megabyte. I guess.
Byte.
Yeah, so it is actually 4 megabyte. That makes sense. Megabit would be microscopic.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those.
This game supports the multi-tap, so you can play four players.
It was one of my test cases for that in the emulator, and
yes,
I played it just long enough to confirm that was working.
Look, so that's interesting. All right, that's right. The thing about this game that anybody that's playing it will notice is that this has possibly the largest number of fonts, or what you could consider like fonts, basically like text graphics of any game I've ever seen. Like every single thing that it calls out on the court uses a different type of text. Oh, look at that. Okay, here we go. Like, see where it says play ball, take it back. Watch those words as they pop up, and every time it's a different word, it's like completely different text. And it's just like, look at that. And they constantly cycle it. It just goes the whole time.
It's just chaos. It's just like
This runs so bad. This is one that the emulator could save up to a degree maybe, but it's never going to play well.
It runs it fast, but it's like it's still not,
this.
Yeah.
Just gonna go over here. Woohoo! Look at that. See, this was during the time when NBA Jam was big, and yet this was like their attempt at like NBA Jam but 3D.
Even though there is an excellent NBA Jam port for the Jaguar.
That's true, there is. Aside from the music, which is extremely weird in that version, but the actual game itself is really well done on the Jag. I agree.
Yep.
That's another one of those rare 60 FPS ports that actually runs well. It's nice.
Yep.
Oof. This game is basically, man, this is... I mean, this is the type of game where you're just like, what were they thinking? Like, between the license, which makes no sense here, the gameplay, the frame rate, everything about it just feels terrible.
Yeah.
Banged. Oh, man. Look at that. Those flat tree billboards on the left there. This stuff is wild. So what do you think they're doing here in terms of, I guess probably using the blitter a lot to do all these like sprite scaling and movement and like this sort of pseudo 3D court?
Yep. Yeah, this is all blitter, and wouldn't be too surprised if all they have is a single frame buffer and everything is being drawn into it with the blitter. There might not even be that many separate objects for the object processor to work with, although the HUD elements could be separate objects. But
oh yeah,
it generally looks like this is probably all blitter driven, which is a big reason that it runs okay, but it doesn't run great.
Yeah, definitely not. Oh, well, thank you, Sega Boy again. That's weird. The questions didn't go through. Go ahead and if you want to ask that there, just in the regular chat, I'll try to keep an eye out instead, since it's not getting through. Sometimes this chat, the YouTube chat, can be weird. You think they should remake that game? No, let's switch this. That is, good lord. Yeah, somebody says the 4 megabytes of ROM comes from the number of fonts in the game. It's all text data. Or
yeah, I mean, it does look like they're all individual graphics for each of the texts.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if they localized that at all. Probably not.
I doubt it. I can load up this version of Flashback. This is a nice version. Okay, so I noticed the max cart size so far has been 4 megabytes. Do you know if the Jeg could support more than that?
Yeah, I can do up to 6.
Okay, cool.
Without bank switching. If you have custom cart hardware, you can do bank switching and get a lot more out of it. I know the game drive itself has bank switching with a scheme that lets you get up to 16 megabytes, I think it is.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And of course, it's got a file system, so you can kind of circumvent whatever the hell you want with that. But
of course. And then if you need more space than that, there's the CD.
Indeed.
Which did not get much use, but yeah. So Flashback, this is a fantastic game, and I think the Jeg version actually turned out pretty good. I prefer this to some of these CD versions of this game swapped out these graphics for like CGI stuff.
Yeah,
and it's extremely dated looking. It's just demo.
I do feel like the in-game graphics in this one, I don't know if this is true, but it feels like they like lifted them from the Genesis or something because
It's very
they
possible.
feel less vibrant than they could be.
Yeah, that's a good point. I
And
forget
just like
which version was the original version. It was
just
either
going from like the memory, because I played it on Super NES first, but going from the memory of that, I remember just having a lot more vibrancy and variety and like character sprites.
yeah, I need to reference that against this. There's a lot of versions of this game,
Yeah.
including a Philips CDI version,
Mm.
which is actually it's okay, but I mean the CDI. You've not looked at the CDI hardware, have you?
Nope.
That thing. Oof. It's just a 68,000 processor with like no real graphics hardware,
Yeah,
so
it just
it can't do anything.
very very slow and everything by hand, huh?
Yep. There was exactly like one developer that figured out how to get like 60 FPS on there in
It
most
sounds
games.
easy to emulate though.
You say that, but then there's the digital video card that they did add that actually does have some extra hardware in it, and that was
Mm,
mainly for FMV, but it had some extra memory in as well, and that is not well emulated currently.
interesting.
It's, man, I'm rusty at Flashback. If Audie were here, he would be playing right through this, no problem. This is like one of his favorite games ever. There we go. I do like these rotoscoped looking animations. That's
Yeah.
one thing this game has always done well. But yeah, this is not pushing the jig, obviously. It's just it's a night. Oh, I just looped around. It's a nice enough port. Oh, okay, wait. So Sega Boy asks, this is interesting. He says, I wanted to know if Rich thinks an open LARA port of Tomb Raider is possible, and whether it could measure up to 32x 3DO and Game Boy Advance ports. Have you seen the Open LARA project, by the way?
I've seen bits and pieces of it. Like I obviously haven't looked at the code, so I don't know any of the technical details about it. But I mean, I could give thoughts on whether I think Tomb Raider could run on the Jaguar.
So yeah,
What
what do you think?
definitely could. Done well, it could run pretty fast. I'd say probably a good 30 hertz or so.
Wow.
Considering you're gonna have to have a lot of blitter involvement. Um, It would be interesting to do some fakery in terms of like approximating some surfaces based on a you're going to be doing your own depth sort anyway because you don't want to use a depth buffer. But it would be interesting to try to approximate some surfaces as object processor entities. Um, the Wolf 3D port on the Jaguar does some interesting stuff with actually it breaks every time you open a door, for example. It will actually, instead of being one frame buffer, it'll break it into three different frame buffers. And you're
Huh.
seeing three different objects in the object processor kind of being stitched together there. And I think there would probably be similar optimization potentials in a Tomb Raider port. But yeah, basically if you just like take this thing that runs okay on these other systems and you port it right over to the Jaguar, it's gonna run like dog shit. But but if you take the time to custom tailor it to the hardware and do the right things, I think a port of Tomb Raider that's done well should be able to run pretty well there.
That's interesting. Yeah. Without So yeah, not knowing enough about OpenLARA itself, I suspect that it would probably not work well just out of the gate and would require,
Yeah,
like you say, a lot of custom work done
yeah,
and thoughtful use of the Jaguar's hardware,
yeah. And a
which I would
lot of
love to
people,
see.
they want to get into it, like porting C code straight into the GPU and DSP,
Ooh.
and it's like there is an old C compiler that you could use as kind of a basis, but I really recommend against that for anybody looking to get into Jaguar development. You get 4,096 bytes of code and data for the GPU and 8,192 for the DSP, and you want basically every single instruction to count. you don't want to be having to swap out new GPU programs throughout the
Yeah.
frame more often than you have to, and so it is very much like a every little byte counts type of situation if you really want to get the most out of performance.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Man, I would love to see that attempted though. Seeing Tomb Raider run on the Jaguar is something that would just be, because there's always been a lot of discussion in the community about whether it could do it or not, right? And most people generally would say no way.
Yeah.
But
I'm definitely on the side of most things are possible if you approach them right and put the effort into it. It's just like most things are not possible if all you intend to do is, port the code and, hope it runs well.
yeah, exactly. And that's unfortunately a lot of the issues that many Jag ports had back in the day.
Yep.
This game, though, so Tempest, this will probably be our last game for the night, because we should probably start to wrap up. But Tempest, I think, is one of the most well-known games on the platform. This is included in Atari 50, of course, which is awesome. So it's good that more people can finally play it. But aside from the really nice use of the CRY color palette stuff for those gradients, what else have you learned about this game when kind of deconstructing it and getting it to emulate?
Well, I guess one interesting thing is that all the game code is just one gigantic 68K assembly file. It's called yak.s.
Really?
Yeah, just massive mounds of 68K driving this whole thing.
That's
And
so Minter.
yeah, and it uses GPU programs for various specialized things, like a separate GPU program for doing these explosion particle effects, a separate GPU program for drawing the web itself. I ran into one of my very first right after right hazard bugs in this game, because when it's drawing the web, it's stopping the register, and it's just totally a bug. Like, I think he didn't even mean to leave this intermediary instruction in there. But if you don't have those right after right hazard cycle timings right, it causes the very last web strip drawn to just flicker. And so that drove me crazy for a little bit trying to track that down.
Oh my god, it's
But in terms of like, unique, interesting technical stuff that it does with the platform, I don't think there's any like super like optimization wizardry going on. It's really just
doesn't run that well either.
Yeah, it's good use of the target hardware in terms of like he knew what he could do, and he knew that he could make these interesting effects without a whole lot of expense, and that a lot of the screen is black as well, so that's saving on a ton of memory bandwidth. You're not having to write to
That's
that.
true.
So
What about the music? I mean, is this an example of a game that basically uses like tracker music?
yep, and a funny thing about that is like I can't remember where I read it, but I read someone say, "Oh yeah, Tempest 2000 introduced CD quality music to the Atari Jaguar and showed it was possible." And it's like, if you actually look at the DAC output frequency for this game, I believe it's something in the area of 14 kilohertz. So,
Definitely
it's
not
actually
CD quality.
yeah, it's a very low sample rate that it's actually outputting through the DAC. And
Wow.
it's nonetheless sounds great, because a lot of the music of that era, the mod tracker type stuff, was designed to operate at low frequencies, and so
Exactly.
I think it still sounds great despite that.
I think it's one of the best sounding games on the Jag. In fact, it's got a really nice soundtrack to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing. So it seems though, based on that there is potential for this game to have been able to run faster with some.
Yeah, definitely.
And I guess that's my question then. In the emulator, even, how does this run currently? If you can you just like uncap the frame rate, since it seems to target 60? Can it just run at flat 60 now?
Yep, you totally can. Just make the blitter
man.
free and disable pipeline emulation. The whole thing runs at 60. and I actually patched an option into the Atari 50 for that.
Dude,
I think
you
it's
check
called Turbo Mode or something, where basically it caps it, and even on a Switch you can play this game at a full 60 hertz.
I
So
think I'm gonna do that after this
it,
after the stream.
yeah,
I gotta test that out.
it feels amazing. Like once I played it like that, I cannot go back. Like I
Yeah,
need the 60 hertz now.
yeah. Wow, that's so cool. That would make a huge difference in this game, man. So before we head off here, is there anything else that you'd like to say about the Jag emulator? Anything else at all?
Um, I mean, I guess as always, I'll thank all the people who are still supporting me on Patreon. That's been like really, it's been actually a vital role in keeping me afloat because my actual contract productivity output has been so bad during all this health stuff. And I've had to actually tell clients, hey, if you have any time constraints on when you need a deliverable right now, I probably am not going to be able to take this contract. I can do slow burner type stuff, but that's about it. And so having the Patreon income has been a huge help. And so thank you
That's
guys.
awesome.
People have been slowly starting to drop off there as kind of expected. My productivity on the emulator hasn't been as high as it was when I immediately got Jaguar CD support and stuff in there. But I'm hoping it'll pick back up again with all this new scripting system stuff, and that'll open a lot of possibilities. And if anybody is interested in supporting me in my efforts in emulation, not just for the Jaguar, but for anything else, please do check out my Patreon. Be of
Absolutely.
great help.
That would be great. Yeah, definitely, guys. Do check that out for sure. And this goes to a good cause, both for Rich himself, but also, the emulator community. This is
Yep.
important work being done here. This is
It's keeping
fantastic.
me alive and keeping the Jaguar alive at the same time.
At the same time, exactly. That's what we're talking about. That is excellent, man. Well, I do want to say thank you so much, Rich, for joining us tonight. Like this was awesome. I just love talking Jag, and you've shined a light on some things that I had been curious about with regard to the hardware, and it kind of gives me, it once again raises my interest in it, and I really want to see what can be done. And I guess the big thing for me is like I couldn't believe that you got AVP running at a smooth frame rate now, and I can't wait to see where that goes. And when, I guess the question is, when do you expect that version of the emulator will begin to roll out to everyone?
Yeah, I'm hoping to have it to Patreons or patrons sometime in the next week or two, and then usually I'll sit on it for like a week or two. I don't know, whatever the appropriate amount of time is, and then do a public release of it. Or I might do something where I release this scripting capable emulator to the public sooner, and then I just start releasing like interesting little script add-ons to my patrons and stuff like that. So we'll see. But either way, it'll be out there pretty soon.
That sounds excellent. Definitely something to look forward to. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and sorry for those little technical hiccups. Hopefully that was all in good fun. I mean, that just
Yeah, I
comes with the Jag,
apologize for
right?
that. Yeah.
Not a problem. Not a problem. We got through it. It was great. So yeah, thanks Rich. Thanks everyone watching, and hopefully we'll be doing more streams again soon. I have other guests lined up, other ideas. This is fun for me, and hopefully fun for the guests. Did you have fun, Rich? I hope you
I
had fun.
did. I had great fun, and thank you so much for having me, John. It was great meeting
course,
you
man.
and talking to you, and hope we can do it again sometime.
I would love to do it again, and I think we will.